The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace courtyard, as Marcus stood perfectly still at his post. His polished boots gleamed against the marble steps, and his uniform displayed not a single wrinkle. For 3 years he had served as one of the palace's most trusted guards, earning respect from both his fellow soldiers and the commanding officers who watched over the royal family's safety. Marcus had always been different from the other guards. While they spent their free time drinking at local taverns or visiting family, he preferred solitude. He would disappear for hours after his shifts, returning only when duty called. His colleagues noticed his reluctance to join them at the communal baths or swimming activities, but they attributed it to his serious nature and dedication to service. The royal family had grown fond of Marcus over the years. Princess Elena often stopped to chat with him during her morning walks through the gardens, and even the stern king acknowledged his exceptional service with subtle nods of approval. Marcus's attention to detail was legendary among the palace staff. He could spot potential threats from remarkable distances and had prevented several security breaches that other guards might have missed. Commander Harrison, a veteran of 25 years in royal service, had taken special notice of Marcus's abilities. The young guard's background check had been flawless when he first applied for the position. Born in a small village outside the capital, orphaned at a young age and raised by his elderly grandmother until her death when he was 16. His military training records showed exceptional performance, and his loyalty tests had been passed without question. What made Marcus particularly valuable was his ability to blend into crowds during undercover assignments. When the royal family attended public events, Marcus could move through the gathering like a shadow, ensuring their safety while remaining virtually invisible to potential threats. His fellow guards often joked that he could disappear and reappear like magic, but they respected his skills nonetheless. The palace operated on strict schedules and protocols, and Marcus followed every rule to perfection. He arrived 15 minutes early for every shift, maintained his equipment with obsessive care, and never missed a single day of duty. His personal quarters were Spartan and organized, containing only the basic necessities and a few books about military strategy and history. Despite his exemplary service, Marcus carried himself with a weight that others couldn't understand. There were moments when his eyes would grow distant, as if he were remembering something painful from his past. The other guards sometimes caught glimpses of sadness in his expression during quiet moments, but Marcus would quickly return to his professional demeanor whenever anyone approached. The royal family's trust in Marcus had grown so complete that they had begun including him in more sensitive assignments. He was often chosen to accompany them on private outings and had access to areas of the palace that were restricted to most personnel. Commander Harrison had even begun considering Marcus for a promotion to the elite inner circle of guards who worked directly with the royal family's most confidential security matters. As Marcus stood at his post that morning, watching the palace grounds come alive with the daily activities of servants, officials, and visitors, he had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The secrets he had buried so deeply, the past he had worked so hard to escape, and the truth he had hidden beneath layers of dedication and service were all about to be exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. The morning had started like any other, but by evening Marcus's life would be forever changed, and the royal family would discover that the person they had trusted most had been harboring a secret that would shake the very foundations of everything they believed about loyalty, service, and the true nature of the man who had sworn to protect them with his life. The annual Royal Summer Festival was the kingdom's most celebrated event, drawing thousands of citizens to the palace grounds for 3 days of festivities. Colorful banners hung from every window, street vendors lined the pathways, and the air filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and celebration. For the royal guards, however, the festival represented their most challenging assignment of the year. Marcus had volunteered for extra shifts during the festival, knowing that the increased security demands would keep him busy and away from the recreational activities that other guards enjoyed. Commander Harrison appreciated his dedication and assigned him to one of the most critical positions, overseeing the security perimeter around the main stage where the royal family would make their public appearances. The first day of the festival passed without incident. Marcus moved through the crowds with his usual efficiency, his trained eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. He coordinated with other guards through discreet hand signals and maintained perfect communication with the command center. The royal family appeared on schedule, delivered their speeches, and participated in the traditional ceremonies while Marcus and his team ensured their complete safety. On the second day, however, an unexpected situation arose. A group of street performers had been hired to entertain the crowds with acrobatic displays and fire dancing. Their leader, a charismatic man named Victor, had been traveling across the kingdom for years, performing at festivals and celebrations. Victor's troupe was known for their elaborate costumes and theatrical presentations that often involved audience participation. As Victor's performance reached its climax, he began selecting volunteers from the crowd to join in a traditional dance that had been part of the kingdom's cultural heritage for centuries. The dance required participants to remove their outer garments as a symbol of equality and unity among all social classes. It was an honor to be chosen, and the crowd always cheered enthusiastically for the volunteers. Victor's eyes scanned the audience and landed on Marcus, who was standing at the edge of the performance area. The entertainer's experience had taught him to recognize individuals who would make the performance more memorable, and there was something about the serious guard that intrigued him. Perhaps it was the way Marcus carried himself, or the slight tension he maintained even during moments of celebration. Before Marcus could react, Victor had bounded over to him and was addressing the crowd with theatrical flair. He spoke about the importance of the royal guards and how their dedication deserved recognition and celebration. The audience began chanting Marcus's name, having noticed his presence throughout the festival and appreciating his professional demeanor. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest as Victor gestured for him to join the performance. The crowd's enthusiasm was building, and several other guards were encouraging him to participate, seeing it as a harmless bit of fun that would boost morale and show the public that the royal guards were approachable and human. Even some members of the royal family, watching from their elevated platform, were smiling and applauding the suggestion. Commander Harrison, monitoring the situation from his position near the stage, initially considered intervening. However, he recognized the positive public relations value of having one of his guards participate in the cultural celebration. The kingdom's relationship with its citizens had always been strengthened by showing that the royal guards were part of the community they served. As the pressure mounted and the crowd's chanting grew louder, Marcus realized he had no choice but to participate without drawing unwanted attention to his reluctance. Victor was already guiding him toward the center of the performance area, and the other dancers were forming a circle around them. The traditional music began playing, and the audience fell silent in anticipation of the ceremonial dance. Victor began explaining the significance of the dance to the crowd, describing how it represented the removal of barriers between people of different backgrounds and social positions. He spoke about the symbolism of shedding outer layers to reveal the true person beneath, the common humanity that connected all members of the kingdom regardless of their roles or responsibilities. Marcus stood frozen as Victor reached for the clasps of his uniform jacket, knowing that in moments his carefully guarded secret would be exposed to thousands of people, including the royal family he had sworn to protect, and the commander who had trusted him with the most sensitive security assignments in the kingdom. Victor's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he began removing Marcus's uniform jacket, treating it as part of the theatrical performance. The crowd watched with delighted anticipation, completely unaware of the internal storm brewing within the guard who had become the unwilling center of attention. Marcus felt as if time had slowed to a crawl, each second stretching into an eternity of dread. The Royal Guard's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing had equipped him to handle this moment of complete vulnerability. His mind raced through possible escape routes, but every option would create a scene that would draw even more attention to himself. The festival crowd had grown larger as word spread about the performance, and now nearly 3,000 people surrounded the stage area. As Victor lifted the jacket away from Marcus's shoulders, the white undershirt beneath became visible. The performer continued his animated narration about the symbolic meaning of the dance, encouraging the crowd to appreciate the courage it took for anyone to participate in such a traditional ceremony. The audience applauded enthusiastically, viewing Marcus's participation as a wonderful gesture of goodwill from the Royal Guard Force. Commander Harrison watched from his elevated position, initially pleased with how the situation was developing. The public's positive response to Marcus's participation would be excellent for the guard's reputation, and he made a mental note to commend Marcus later for his willingness to engage with the community. The commander had always believed that strong relationships between the guards and citizens were essential for effective security operations. Princess Elena, standing beside her father on the royal platform, found herself particularly interested in the performance. She had always appreciated Marcus's dedicated service and professional demeanor, but seeing him in this more human context made her realize how little any of them actually knew about the guards who protected them daily. She wondered about Marcus's background and the experiences that had shaped him into such a devoted protector. Victor reached for the hem of Marcus's undershirt, preparing for the next phase of the traditional dance. The performer's enthusiasm was infectious, and the crowd began clapping rhythmically to encourage the proceedings. Several other guards in the audience were smiling and cheering for their colleague, proud to see one of their own representing them so well in front of the royal family and the kingdom's citizens. As the fabric began to lift, Marcus made a desperate attempt to stop the process. He grabbed Victor's wrists and tried to communicate through facial expressions that he could not continue with the performance. However, Victor interpreted this as natural nervousness and stage fright, something he had encountered many times with volunteer participants. The entertainer's training had taught him to help shy individuals overcome their hesitation through gentle encouragement and humor. Victor addressed the crowd with a booming voice, explaining that even brave guards could feel nervous when performing in front of so many people. He encouraged the audience to show their support and appreciation, which only resulted in louder cheering and more enthusiastic applause. The performer's years of experience had convinced him that most reluctant participants felt grateful afterward for being encouraged to step outside their comfort zones. The fabric continued to rise despite Marcus's resistance, and soon the lower portion of his back became visible to those standing behind him. A few audience members in those positions began pointing and whispering among themselves, though their words were lost in the general noise of the celebration. Marcus could feel the exposure beginning and knew that within moments, his secret would be revealed to everyone present. Commander Harrison, still watching from his vantage point, began to notice the change in Marcus's body language. The guard's usual confidence and composure had been replaced by obvious distress, and Harrison started to wonder if he should intervene. However, the crowd's enthusiasm was so overwhelming that any interruption would create confusion and potentially embarrassing questions about why the performance had been stopped. As Victor prepared to complete the removal of Marcus's shirt, the guard made one final attempt to preserve his secret. He spun around to face the performer directly, hoping to create a physical barrier that would block the audience's view of his back. However, this movement only served to position him so that more people could see the area that had been concealed for 3 years of faithful service. The traditional music reached a crescendo as Victor, with theatrical flourish, lifted the shirt completely away from Marcus's body. In that instant, Marcus's carefully guarded secret was exposed to the entire festival crowd, the royal family, and most devastatingly, to Commander Harrison, who would soon understand that everything he thought he knew about his most trusted guard had been built on deception. The gasp that rose from the crowd was audible even over the festival music. Across Marcus's back, covering nearly the entire surface from his shoulders to his waist, stretched an intricate tattoo that told a story no one had expected to see. The design was unmistakably the symbol of the Shadow Brotherhood, the kingdom's most feared criminal organization that had terrorized the realm for decades before being supposedly destroyed. 5 years earlier, the tattoo was not simply a casual marking or youthful indiscretion. Every line and symbol had specific meaning within the Brotherhood's hierarchy. The central image showed a black wolf surrounded by 13 daggers, indicating that Marcus had held the rank of enforcer within the organization. Smaller symbols around the main design revealed his involvement in specific operations, including some that had resulted in the deaths of royal officials and military leaders. Commander Harrison felt his world collapse as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Years of military training had taught him to identify enemy markings and organizational symbols, and the Shadow Brotherhood's tattoos were burned into the memory of every security official in the kingdom. The Brotherhood had been responsible for numerous assassination attempts against the royal family and had, infiltrated government institutions at the highest levels. The crowd's initial shock quickly transformed into confusion and then growing anger as people began to understand what they were witnessing. Voices started shouting questions and accusations. Some demanded explanations, while others called for Marcus's immediate arrest. The festive atmosphere evaporated completely, replaced by intention that threatened to erupt into violence. Victor, still holding Marcus's shirt, found himself caught in a situation far beyond anything he had encountered in his years of performance. The entertainer's face showed complete bewilderment as he realized that his traditional dance had uncovered something that was clearly dangerous and significant. He dropped the garment and stepped backward, distancing himself from the chaos he had unknowingly created. Princess Elena's hand flew to her mouth as she processed what she was seeing. This was the man who had walked beside her during morning garden strolls, who had protected her family at countless public events, who had been trusted with access to the most secure areas of the palace. The realization that a former member of the Shadow Brotherhood had been living among them, protecting them, created a vertigo-inducing shift in her understanding of reality. Marcus stood motionless in the center of the performance area, his back exposed to thousands of hostile eyes. The secret he had carried for 8 years, the past he had tried desperately to escape, was now displayed for all to see. He could hear the crowd's growing agitation and knew that within minutes, the situation would become completely uncontrollable. The other royal guards present began reaching for their weapons, their training taking over as they recognized a potential threat to the royal family. However, their confusion was evident as they struggled to reconcile the Marcus they had worked alongside for 3 years, with the evidence now visible on his back. Some remembered his exceptional service and dedication, while others felt betrayed by his deception. Commander Harrison's mind raced through the implications of this revelation. Every security protocol Marcus had been involved with was now compromised. Every mission he had participated in needed to be reevaluated. Every piece of intelligence he had access to might have been shared with enemy forces. The commander felt personally responsible for the security breach, having been the one to recommend Marcus for his most sensitive assignments. King Robert, standing beside his daughter on the royal platform, maintained his composure despite the internal chaos this revelation created. His experience as a ruler had taught him to process shocking information quickly and make decisions under pressure. However, even his extensive experience had not prepared him for discovering that one of his most trusted protectors was a former member of the organization that had tried repeatedly to destroy his family. The festival crowd began pressing closer to the performance area, their curiosity and anger overriding their usual respect for the royal guards. Some demanded immediate justice while others called for explanations. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control, and the security forces present were vastly outnumbered by the agitated citizens who felt deceived and endangered. Marcus finally broke his paralysis and began reaching for his discarded shirt, but the damage was already done. Images of his exposed tattoo were being burned into the memories of thousands of witnesses, and the story would spread throughout the kingdom within hours. His carefully constructed new life was crumbling around him, and the family he had genuinely learned to protect and serve was now staring at him with expressions of shock, betrayal, and growing fear. Commander Harrison's voice cut through the chaos like a blade as he barked orders to his guards. Within seconds, Marcus found himself surrounded by men who had been his colleagues and friends just moments before. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion, betrayal, and professional duty as they drew their weapons and formed a protective barrier between him and the increasingly agitated crowd. Marcus slowly pulled his shirt back on, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He knew that any sudden motion could trigger a violent response from either the guards or the crowd. As the fabric covered the damning evidence on his back, he felt a strange sense of relief mixed with inevitable dread. The secret that had weighed on him for years was finally exposed, and while the consequences would be severe, the burden of deception had been lifted. The royal family was quickly escorted from the platform by their personal security detail. Princess Elena looked back over her shoulder as she was being led away, her eyes meeting Marcus's for what both knew would be the final time. In that brief moment, Marcus saw not hatred or fear in her expression, but profound sadness and confusion. The princess, who had shared so many pleasant conversations with him, was struggling to reconcile the person she thought she knew with the reality that had been revealed. Commander Harrison approached Marcus with careful steps, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword but not drawing the weapon. The commander's face showed the deep betrayal he felt, but his professional training kept his emotions in check. Years of experience had taught him that interrogations and explanations needed to happen in controlled environments, not in front of angry crowds. The festival grounds were rapidly emptying as security personnel directed civilians away from the area. However, many people lingered at the edges of the scene, reluctant to leave without understanding what they had witnessed. Word was already spreading through the departing crowds, and runners were heading toward the city to share the shocking news with those who had not attended the festival. As the immediate chaos subsided, Marcus found himself able to speak for the first time since his exposure. His voice was quiet but clear as he addressed Commander Harrison directly. He acknowledged his past membership in the Shadow Brotherhood but emphasized that his service to the royal family had been genuine and that he had never compromised their security or shared intelligence with any external forces. Commander Harrison listened to Marcus's initial explanation with professional skepticism. The Brotherhood had been known for their sophisticated infiltration techniques and long-term operational planning. The idea that a former enforcer had genuinely reformed and served loyally for 3 years seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet the commander could not ignore Marcus's exemplary service record during that time. The remaining guards maintained their protective formation, while Harrison made the decision to transport Marcus to the palace for formal interrogation. The situation required careful handling to prevent public unrest and to determine the full extent of any security compromises. The commander knew that the investigation would need to examine every aspect of Marcus's service and every operation he had been involved with. As they prepared to leave the festival grounds, Marcus made a request that surprised everyone present. He asked for permission to speak directly to the royal family before being taken into custody. The request seemed almost absurd given the circumstances, but there was something in Marcus's tone that suggested he had information that might be crucial for their understanding of the situation. Commander Harrison initially refused the request, citing security protocols and the obvious risk of allowing a confirmed former Brotherhood member near the royal family. However, Marcus persisted, explaining that there were aspects of his story that could only be understood if he was allowed to provide a complete explanation of his transformation and his genuine dedication to protecting those he had once been trained to destroy. The debate over Marcus's request continued as they moved toward the palace. Some guards argued that any communication should happen through official interrogation channels, while others pointed out that Marcus had demonstrated his loyalty through 3 years of faithful service. The unprecedented nature of the situation meant that standard protocols provided little guidance for handling such a complex case. During the tense journey back to the palace, Marcus reflected on the events that had led him to this moment. His thoughts drifted to the reasons he had originally left the Shadow Brotherhood, the gradual transformation of his beliefs during his years of service, and the genuine affection he had developed for the royal family he had been assigned to protect. The irony was not lost on him that his most successful mission as a Brotherhood member had been to infiltrate the Royal Guard, but his failure to complete that mission had led to the most meaningful period of his life. The palace gates loomed ahead as the group approached, and Marcus knew that within hours his fate would be decided by people who had trusted him completely, but now had every reason to consider him their greatest enemy. The Royal Council chamber had never hosted a more tense gathering. King Robert sat at the head of the massive oak table, his expression grave as he processed the implications of the day's revelations. Princess Elena occupied her usual seat to his right, while Commander Harrison stood at attention, still grappling with the personal and professional betrayal he felt. Marcus stood in the center of the room, flanked by 4 guards, his hands bound but his posture still maintaining the dignity he had carried throughout his years of service. Commander Harrison began his report with clinical precision, detailing Marcus's service record, his security clearances, and the operations he had been involved with during his 3 years of duty. The commander's voice remained steady, but those present could hear the underlying strain as he recounted how thoroughly Marcus had been integrated into the palace's most sensitive security protocols. King Robert listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific incidents or decisions. The monarch's experience had taught him to separate emotional responses from strategic considerations, but even his practiced composure was tested by the magnitude of the security breach. Every assassination attempt that had been thwarted, every security measure that had been implemented, now needed to be reevaluated in light of Marcus's true background. When Commander Harrison completed his report, the room fell silent except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. The weight of the situation pressed down on everyone, present as they contemplated the full implications of having a former Shadow Brotherhood enforcer serving in their most trusted ranks for 3 years. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention despite his restrained position. He began by acknowledging the shock and betrayal that everyone in the room must be feeling, recognizing that his deception had violated the most fundamental bonds of trust that made their society possible. However, he asked for the opportunity to explain how he had arrived at this moment and why his service to the royal family had been genuine despite his original intentions. The story Marcus told was unlike anything the royal family had expected to hear. He revealed that his infiltration of the royal guard had been part of a long-term Brotherhood operation designed to position agents within the kingdom's most critical institutions. His mission had been to gather intelligence about the royal family's routines and security measures, then coordinate with external forces to eliminate the entire royal line during a carefully planned attack. Princess Elena felt a chill run through her as Marcus described the original plan in detail. The attack had been scheduled to take place during the previous year's harvest festival, using information that Marcus was supposed to provide about security vulnerabilities and the family's movement patterns. The realization that she and her family had been walking unknowingly toward their deaths for months created a profound sense of vertigo. Marcus continued his explanation, describing how his perspective had gradually changed during his months of service. The royal family he had been trained to see as oppressive tyrants revealed themselves to be genuinely caring leaders who worked tirelessly for their people's welfare. His fellow guards, whom he had expected to find corrupt and brutal, proved to be honorable individuals dedicated to protecting innocent lives. The transformation had not been sudden or dramatic, Marcus explained, but rather a slow erosion of the hatred and resentment that the Brotherhood had cultivated within him since childhood. Daily interactions with people he had been taught to despise gradually revealed the fundamental humanity that connected all members of the kingdom, regardless of their social positions or political roles. When the time came for Marcus to fulfill his mission and provide the intelligence needed for the assassination, he found himself unable to betray the people who had become more than targets to him. Instead, he had sent false information to his Brotherhood contacts, causing the planned attack to fail. His handlers had attributed the failure to changed security protocols rather than deliberate sabotage, allowing Marcus to maintain his cover, while secretly protecting the family he had grown to genuinely care for. Commander Harrison interrupted Marcus's narrative with sharp questions about his ongoing contact with Brotherhood agents and the possibility that other infiltrators remained within the palace structure. Marcus provided detailed information about communication methods, meeting locations, and the identities of Brotherhood members he had known during his years with the organization. The intelligence Marcus shared was more comprehensive than anything the kingdom's security forces had previously obtained about the Shadow Brotherhood's operations. He revealed safe houses, financial networks, and operational strategies that could be used to permanently dismantle the remaining elements of the organization. His information was so detailed and valuable that it represented a devastating blow to any surviving Brotherhood cells. As Marcus concluded his explanation, the room remained silent as each person processed the extraordinary circumstances they were facing. The man they had trusted most had indeed been their enemy, but his transformation had made him perhaps their most valuable protector, even as his deception had created the greatest security breach in the kingdom's history. The deliberation that followed Marcus's revelation lasted through the night and into the following morning. King Robert dismissed the guards and called for a private council, with only Princess Elena and Commander Harrison present. The 3 individuals who had been most affected by Marcus's deception needed to determine not only his fate, but also how to handle the broader implications of what they had learned. Commander Harrison struggled with conflicting emotions as he considered Marcus's situation. His military training demanded that traitors be punished severely, regardless of their subsequent actions. However, his experience working alongside Marcus had shown him a level of dedication and competence that could not be easily dismissed. The intelligence Marcus had provided about the Shadow Brotherhood was already proving invaluable to ongoing security operations. Princess Elena found herself thinking about the conversations she had shared with Marcus during their walks through the palace gardens. She remembered his thoughtful questions about the kingdom's history and his genuine interest in understanding the challenges facing the royal family. Those interactions now took on new meaning as she realized they represented a former enemy learning to see her family as real people rather than political symbols. King Robert weighed the precedent that any decision would establish for future cases. Showing mercy to a former Brotherhood member could encourage other infiltrators to come forward, potentially exposing additional security threats. However, executing someone who had genuinely reformed and provided valuable service might discourage others from abandoning hostile organizations and seeking redemption. The intelligence Marcus had shared was already bearing fruit. Security forces had raided 3 Brotherhood safe houses during the night, capturing several wanted criminals and seizing documents that revealed additional plots against the kingdom. The information he provided was not only accurate but more current and detailed than anything the royal investigators had obtained through years of conventional intelligence gathering. As dawn broke over the palace, King Robert made his decision. Marcus would face trial for his deception and his original infiltration mission, but his cooperation and the intelligence he had provided would be considered as mitigating factors. More importantly, the king recognized that Marcus's transformation represented something valuable that should be preserved rather than destroyed. Commander Harrison was assigned to lead a comprehensive security review using Marcus's intelligence to identify and eliminate remaining Brotherhood threats. The investigation would examine every aspect of palace security and personnel, but it would be conducted with the understanding that redemption was possible for those who genuinely sought to change their allegiances. Marcus himself was offered a choice that surprised everyone present. He could accept exile from the kingdom with a guarantee of safe passage, or he could remain and serve a period of supervised probation while continuing to assist with security operations against the Shadow Brotherhood. The decision reflected the royal family's recognition that his knowledge and skills were too valuable to lose, despite the breach of trust his deception had created. The public response to the revelations required careful management. The festival incident had been witnessed by thousands of people, and rumors were already spreading throughout the kingdom. King Robert decided to address the situation directly through a public announcement that acknowledged the security breach while emphasizing the valuable intelligence that had been gained and the ongoing efforts to protect the kingdom from remaining threats. Princess Elena requested permission to speak with Marcus privately before his trial. During their conversation, she asked him about the difficulty of maintaining his deception for so long and the internal conflict he must have experienced while serving people he had been trained to destroy. Marcus's answers revealed the depth of his transformation and the genuine remorse he felt for the deception that had been necessary to protect both himself and the family he had grown to care for. The trial itself became a landmark event in the kingdom's legal history. For the first time, the courts had to consider how to balance punishment for serious crimes against recognition of genuine redemption and valuable service. Legal scholars debated the precedents being established, while security experts analyzed the intelligence value of encouraging defection from hostile organizations. Marcus's sentence reflected the complexity of his situation. He received a formal conviction for infiltration and deception, but the punishment was suspended in recognition of his subsequent service and cooperation. He would remain under supervision while continuing to work with security forces to eliminate remaining Brotherhood threats, essentially transforming his punishment into continued service to the kingdom he had learned to protect. The events surrounding Marcus's exposure ultimately strengthened the kingdom's security rather than weakening it. The intelligence he provided led to the complete dismantling of the Shadow Brotherhood's remaining operations, while the precedent of showing mercy to reformed enemies encouraged several other infiltrators to come forward voluntarily. Commander Harrison, despite his initial feelings of betrayal, came to recognize that Marcus's transformation had been genuine and that his continued service was invaluable. Years later, Marcus would be remembered not as the enemy who infiltrated the royal guard, but as the protector whose change of heart had saved the royal family and led to the final defeat of their most dangerous enemies. His tattoo, once a symbol of his commitment to destroying the kingdom, became a reminder that even the most dedicated enemies could be transformed into the most loyal defenders when treated with understanding and given the opportunity for redemption.